Need a sealant to help shield your home from the elements? Introducing Tight Shield, your weatherproof shield against the elements. One of Titebond's newest sealant products, Tight Shield fills gaps up to 2 inches while remaining flexible. It adheres to almost any material and expands and contracts up to 50% of joint size. Plus, it comes in a variety of colors and is paintable. Check out Tight Shield and the rest of Titebond's sealant line at titebond.com.
There are minimum setbacks for fire separation between buildings. If you did have something impinging on the fire setback distance, you can do things like fiber cement siding and fiber cement trim would give us a Class A fire rating, and then we could get closer to our fire setback position.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. I'm Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Homebuilding Senior Editor Brian Pontalillo.
Hey, everyone.
Fine Homebuilding Editorial Advisor Mike Girton.
Hello.
And our producer Andres Semeniego.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to FHBpodcast at finehomebuilding.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. It is a pleasure to see you guys this morning. Thanks for being here. How you doing, Mike?
Good. You know, Patrick, your youthful enthusiasm is infectious and brightens every day we record a podcast. I mean, I was out in the rain a little while ago, slogging some mud, and I thought, oh, I'm going to get to go inside where it's warm, and you're Patrick.
That delights me, Mike. Thank you. It is a pleasure of my day seeing you guys. How you doing, Brian?
I'm doing okay. Glad to be here as well. I haven't yet been outside in the mud, Mike, but I have been outside in the dirt for the last few days through the weekend doing some landscaping. So, the weather's been nice, and I enjoy landscaping work, so it's been great.
So more of your micro beds, or
that's a good question, Mike. Because I did talk about my micro gardens last time we recorded, but I'm working on the walkway to our house from our driveway and parking area. So when we built the house, we had a mud situation. We got some heavy rains during construction, and we just had like this real intense mud all around the house, and we needed a way to get from our vehicles to the house, in and out of the house with materials without making too much of a mess. And the excavator had dropped off a bunch of the base for the driveway. And so I made these from each entrance to the driveway, and then from those paths to the parking area. I made these really quick walks. I just kind of carved them out of the mud and threw down a bunch of this driveway base, and they just gave us something less mucky to walk on as we went in and out of the house. And those have remained our paths in and out of the house ever since. And they work. I got lucky because they work in terms of their directions. But there are a couple of points where they were kind of steep, and it was still just this driveway base. And so last weekend I started refining these walks with a couple of steps so that the elevation changes are not so dramatic in a few parts. And I'm just doing some poured concrete steps, so just simple rectangular forms, pouring some concrete, and then I'm edging the beds and planting a little bit around them, and using some stones to capture the pea gravel that will be the walkways once I'm done. So I'm moving some bigger stones around to help with the differences in elevation. And when this is all done, which will hopefully be in the next day or two, then I'll move the pea gravel, which got delivered yesterday, into the walkways.
Oh boy, how exciting!
I'll take a photo when it's done, and I think I have a good photo of how they are now, so I can have a little before and after for the podcast page.
So in my mind, I hear like walkway, blah, 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 concrete. So are you mixing your own bags of concrete? What are you doing? How's that?
Yeah, really nothing special. So I made these concrete forms with framing lumber, and then and the steps need to be about to make a difference and not have too many steps. I decided that the steps need to be about 7 inches tall, and then I can space them out and put them around. And And so I made these, got some framing lumber, ripped it to the height that I wanted, made these rectangular forms, very simple. But then as I was going to, and this is my own idea, so forgive me, but then, as I was thinking, like, I'm going to fill these 36, 12 inch by 36 inch by 7 inch deep forms with a lot of concrete. That it seems like it'd be wasteful. So I have all this scrap lumber. So I just right in this, like when I put the form on the ground and when I got it level and secured, I just cut a couple of 2x4s, screwed them that were shorter than the length of the step, screwed them together and stuck them on the ground in the bottom of the form and poured the concrete over them to just eat up some of that space and not use so much concrete.
Are you trying to create habitat for insects? What's your plan here?
I'm not worried about insects out there. There's going to be insects out there either way.
You know what the old timers used to do when they'd pour a set
Throw their liquor bottles in there is what they did.
Well, yeah, we've seen a lot of that. But before they had the precast entry stairs that you see on a pretty economical house, they used to pour their own. But to take up that volume inside of your formed set of stairs up to the landing, they take a couple bales of hay and they'd stack them up. And they didn't go out to the the left and the right side, and then they just cast the concrete right around the hole. And my father did that, and now thinking of a habitat, chipmunks and squirrels. It's like this time of year they're back in there. Someday I want to break it up and see how much is in there of their nesting materials.
Oh my gosh, it's an early void form. How exciting, it's yeah. What have you been doing, Andres?
I started doing some work on my yard. I finished mulching. I drove the truck to the yard and got 2 yards of mulch and finally finished putting mulch in my yard. So that's what I've been doing.
Do you like that work? It strikes me as very exhausting and hot, dirty stuff. And fortunately, Carol does all of it. But do you like that project?
Yeah, I like the outdoors. I like to be outside and work on the yard and stuff. Speaking of that, I'm actually planning a trip to New Hampshire for my birthday this month.
To do what?
To do some hiking. I was thinking maybe Mount Lafayette, and I think there's Mountain Washington also.
Yeah, have you been to the White Mountains before?
I've been once. It was during COVID. Back in 2020, but it was closed, as you know, and so I wasn't able to do any hiking or anything like that.
My advice is to take rain gear and warm clothes, even if you're going in the dead of summer.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a beautiful hike up Flume, Liberty, and Lafayette. You can go across the ridge there. It's kind of above tree line. Washington, that's a climb.
It's a climb, yeah. I'm planning to be there for the Memorial Weekend. I think it is 3 days. So I might be able to pull it.
Yeah, cool. Well, tell us and take pictures.
2 million
please.
Other friends.
So I have a question, guys. And, I mentioned in the podcast before, but my deck on the front of the house, and it's very small. It's, I believe, probably like 5x5, 5x6. And the decking is starting to decay. And it's getting worse faster than it was. And it's installed in 2010. So it is now, 13, 14 years old. How long are modern PT deck boards supposed to last? And should I be expecting to have to replace all this? Or can I get away with just pieces? And will that look silly, or will it be a safety problem? Go ahead, Mike.
It depends. Well, the way I would first approach it, if you're going to do selective replacement, is take a bleach and water spray, and because that's going to take off the mold or whatever else is on the surface, so that you get a look. You get to see what the wood underneath is going to look like if it's going to be paired with new boards. because what you might find is that once you clean them up, that they're not going to look anything like a new board, and there's going to be too much of a contrast between them that you will find objectionable. But I did that for a number of years on a deck that I built in 2007, similar time frame where the boards started to go. And then I was replacing them every couple of years, the ones that were bad enough to be, unsafe. And then eventually I just said, this is not worth the hassle. They weren't going to match when I started patching them in, and I just took the whole thing off and replaced it. And if you end up replacing the boards and you're going to use pressure treated, definitely get the ground contact. Usually the deck boards themselves are usually above ground contact, the UC3B treatment. But I would, if you can find them at a good yard, the number one grade UC4A product, which is just a slightly more treatment chemicals in that will be more resistant, so that you won't be replacing it in another 12 or 14 years. It'll go, another half a lifetime.
That's great to know. Do you think that is a reasonable expectation of lifespan? 14 years? Should this stuff be lasting longer than that? And I would love to hear your response, Mike, and then listeners too, what they've seen out in the field.
There were so many treatments that were available at the time, and even now, that were, I won't say new to the market, but they were less time tested for decking products. And we found, and I've seen in similar situations as yours, where they just aren't lasting more than 10 or 15 years before edges and ends start to decay. And it's not all the boards, it's just a few of them. And there's a lot of reasons that could be the case. But I think that the treatment chemicals and the companies have dialed in their processes so that I believe today's boards, and hopefully, I'm hoping that they're going to last a lot longer, like in the 20 to 30 year range at least, and maybe longer. That's why I currently, anytime I take apart an old pressure treated deck built before 2003, I always save the deck boards because they were CCA. And literally, I've got a pile in my backyard, and when a friend's going to redo a little deck or something, I just share my stock because we know those boards will last forever.
I'll be over after the show.
Okay. Yeah. Well, how big? You said it's 5 by 5. I think I might have enough for you.
That's really interesting. You heard it, folks. This is your assignment. Please write into the podcast email box and tell me about your experience with the longevity of pressure-treated deck boards and the framing, too. I'm curious what I'm going to find when I start pulling the rotted boards off, if the joists and rest of the structure are similarly decaying.
I wonder, I wonder how much a finish can help. I have refinished a number of pressure-treated decks, both the old boards. My mother-in-law has a deck that I've refinished for her a couple of times that it's 30 years old, and it's doing great. Pressure-treated boards, the finish looks awesome. If you do a really solid job refinishing them, you can give them a lot of life. And I wonder how helpful that is on the newer materials as well. Like, once they, give them a few years to dry out, and once they start to look weathered, getting some kind of finish on there.
So I am the worst case scenario. No finish, no water sealing. Yeah, I guess I've learned my lesson. Our first feedback comes from Kurt. Hey, everyone. Thanks for the advice and help over the last few years. I'm writing about episode 626 and the discussion about the loss of roof overhangs. I live in Seattle, and we're seeing this trend as the default in new construction. My suspicion is that this is entirely driven by the desire to maximize the building square footage and lot fill. By reducing or eliminating overhangs, you can have a larger building on a small lot. This is particularly true with DADUs, or multifamily buildings on a parcel. It seems to be all about the metrics used in real estate sales, that square footage is the most important consideration and not building durability or performance. Unfortunately, it seems like the cube trend is here to stay, even though it has a myriad of problems in some climates like ours. Let's hope their water control layers are well detailed. This one comes from Kurt. And if y'all are wondering what a DADU is, I had to look it up. It's a detached accessory dwelling unit, which obviously is separate from the main building, and contrasting to an ADU, which is attached to the main dwelling, which I did not know. What do you guys think?
I think that there's a variability in the zoning setback and how different communities measure that, whether they measure the setback distance from property lines to structures from the foundation, from the exterior walls, or from any roof overhangs. I know in my whole state, for the most part, that every community I've ever worked in, they measure from the wall and sometimes from the foundation, but we can have a roof overhang or even a cantilevered projection that will impinge a little bit into that setback without a problem. Particularly the roof overhangs are not an issue. Yeah.
Mike, could it be, I'm trying to remember, and I'm drawing a blank, but I'm trying to remember how roof overhangs play into the fire separation codes. And could it be with ADUs and tight lots? Could it have more to do with that than with the setbacks?
I think you're right, because there are minimum setbacks for fire separation between buildings, and you can do, there are ways to, if you did have something impinging on the fire setback distance, you can do things like we used to use fiber cement siding and fiber cement trim, because it would give us a Class A fire rating, and then we could get closer to our fire setback position. There are lots of things that play into this that it'd be interesting. Kurt brings up an interesting issue. It'd be nice to have kind of a definitive answer, because obviously we don't know.
I was interestingly, I was in my house this morning. It was raining really hard, and I was looking out a window at the rain, and we have a single-story house, and a very deep overhang, and the top of the windows are tucked nicely under that overhang, and there's a little bit of water on the bottom of the windows and no water at the top of the window. And I thought, this is why you do this, right? Leaks happen at the top of the window, and the top of this window is not getting wet. I thought, I wish I had these overhangs on the gable ends as well, right over the tops of the windows.
What do you think it's going to be like when people look back 60 years or 70 years from now at all of these zero overhang buildings, both from a durability standpoint and from an architectural standpoint? Will they be white elephants in neighborhoods, or will they be accepted as like a early 21st century modern box design home, and it'll become a iconic design that people will try to mimic in the future?
I have my theory, and it's based on my own observations. So Connecticut is a hotbed of brutalist architecture. So companies who left New York City in the 50s and 60s, probably for lower taxes, settled in Connecticut and built these ugly concrete buildings along the highway corridors. And I've watched them get rebuilt because they are made of concrete and have no overhangs. I watched the Carrier building get redone, where they try and put this pookie on the building and then recoat it. And I'm guessing we're going to have the same problems in these residential structures similarly, but time will tell. What do you think of the brutalist architecture that Connecticut is known for, Brian? Like any architectural movement, there's buildings that I like and buildings that I don't. There's that is it the Pirelli tire building? Yeah,
down in New Haven, which I think is super cool. I mean, it's like that's an example of it that I really like. There's also a building at Yale. I think it's an archive building that is brutalist, but it's not. It has like stone on the outside instead of concrete, and I like that building a lot as well. But yeah, there's a lot of it that just looks. Yeah,
it looks like it came from the Eastern Bloc. I swear.
Yes, it fits the name. It fits the name well.
This comes from Nate. Hey, podcast crew. I'm driving to Alaska from Michigan, so I finally have time to comment on things and ask another question. Nate, you're going to have to write us how that drive went. That's a long way. First, I'd like to let Patrick know that I love his line from an interview when he asked her a question about a particular product and followed it up with, "We name names on this podcast." Funny, and also I believe construction should not tiptoe around what products we like rather than saying the typical, There are a lot of good products out there. Second, I forget what podcast number it was, but there was a conversation on if owning a sawmill can be a feasible option to save money and saw lumber for building your own house and projects. Well, I'm doing it somewhat, so I had a few comments. I have a small portable bandsaw mill. I don't have a kiln and no heavy equipment. Consider those if you want to take that type of project on. My build is a timber frame, and the majority of timber frames are built with green wood, so there's no drying required. My source of logs is standing dead spruce, which are free. Dead standing is important if you don't have the equipment to dry the stock because the dead stock is lighter and more movable. The biggest things I would say is your source and species of logs and how you're going to move them. If you don't have any equipment available and you think you're going to get to the bottom end wood miser and crank out 1,000 board feet of green white oak in a day because your sawmill says it can cut 100 board feet an hour, you are mistaken. I would say unless you have a decent sized sawmill operation, I would only plan on supplementing your lumber with a sawmill. Without the infrastructure to move, cut, stack, and dry it, it just doesn't seem feasible to make a stick-framed house with your own lumber. But you can cut a quarter sawn white oak board just as fast as a 2x6, and that will save you lots of money as well, and the ability to custom cut whatever you want. That said, don't listen to me. It can be done to build your own house with your own lumber. Lastly is my question. In my house build, I'm planning on doing a warm side air and vapor barrier of Rothoblas Pro Klima. It is a smart vapor retarder control layer. With the timber frame, I essentially built a stick frame around my timber frame, and therefore, the first thing I put on the outs of the timbers is tongue and groove paneling and drywall, then my vapor barrier. My question is, should I trust my vapor barrier to be a temporary weather barrier until I get my Larson trusses, insulation, WRB, and roofing in place? If not, any suggestions are welcome. Thanks for all you guys do. Nate, thanks for the question, Nate. What do you guys think? Is that going to be enough to protect his timber frame while he builds the rest of the house? Mike?
He's going to have to check with the manufacturer specifically. I looked up some of the ProClima products in the Intello X, which is a vapor retarder, can be left exposed up to 60 days at the exterior. And that's one of its, selling points, as opposed to the regular Intello. But check, it might be that Nate's going to have a longer open time, and then which that you wouldn't want to expose it more than the manufacturer's limit of 60 days. So yeah, do a double check with the manufacturer and or a manufacturer's rep just to make sure the period of time would be okay. You don't want the UV light to break down the material because you won't be able to tell just looking at it, and it'll be hidden once you cover everything up. And, if it's not going to perform properly, in service after being damaged by UV light, you're going to be unhappy about that.
Brian, you have further thoughts on that? I totally agree with Mike. And I did have the thought that if he needs it to be exposed for longer and if he's concerned about it, I don't think it'd be a problem to put up a layer of Tyvek over it.
Or I was thinking in sections. Do it in sections, right? If you're going to frame one wall, put that up just before you get it up there, and don't do the entire structure, because I think it's going to be hard to protect it too. And this stuff is expensive. Am I right? I want to say it's like $1 a square foot or more.
Yeah.
Depending on which one you get, it's like 65 cents to $1. Yeah. Per square foot.
Our first question comes from Kevin. And I think this is a great question, and one I have my own, it's my question too. Kevin says, with a pretty good house, trying to build tight and ventilate right, once you have a good house, what's the best way to address using natural ventilation during the good times of the year? We currently live in an old farmhouse, it's a shack really, that has natural ventilation through its structure, roof, floor, walls, penetrations, windows, and doors, which are all leaky. Fortunately, it's only about 1,100 square feet and isn't too expensive to heat and cool. We live in Northwest Arkansas, climate zone 4A. Deep winter here can see temperatures below zero on occasion, but regularly below freezing and down in the teens. 2 inches of snow will shut down the whole region, for point of order. Summer temps may range from upper 80s to well over 100. We saw 112 last year on a shaded thermometer, and humidity is always high. It's pretty common to wake up many mornings to see water dripping off the roof and no rain for ages. However, there are usually at least a few months between the really hot and really cold where the weather outside is really nice. If the temps are in the mid 40s to low 70s, even if the humidity is high, it feels pleasant and there's often a nice breeze. I have, of course, attic fans that draw air through the windows and exhaust into the vented attic space are also a thing here, and I understand why, but they obviously affect the structure. My question is, what should you do with your high-efficiency home when you want to open windows and doors to enjoy the climate outside? Simply shut down your air filtration, exchange, and air conditioning systems until you decide to close those things on, put them on again. There may be days on end where this is possible and quite comfortable. We leave our windows and often doors open in our not-so-good house. The answer may be obvious, but I have a tendency to overthink things and have much more knowledge than experience. There is one this one's probably pretty easy for you guys, and while I haven't read everything there, I haven't seen you address this particular topic covered in FHB or GBA. Everything seems to be centered about how to keep indoor air quality as perfect as possible. So are you allowed to open your windows in a pretty good house, I think is the question, because you go to a lot of trouble to condition the air inside and ensure that it is a comfortable temperature and humidity. Brian, I think you live in what most of us would describe as a pretty good house. Do you open your windows, and do you notice a sacrificing comfort if you do so?
I open windows and doors and as much as possible. And I turn, when I know the windows, obviously I turn the heat pump off when I'm doing that. And I turn the ERV off as well when I know I'm going to be doing it for days on end, right? In the swing season, when we're really in that time period where I know it's going to be going for days on end, I turn it all off and we just open windows and doors. And I don't know, this is something this part of the question is something that I've never talked to an expert about. But you're opening windows and doors, and we're opening it all up. So what's the point of having any of that? What would be the point of having any of that running? Even the ERV, which has has a MERV rated filter in it, still just wouldn't make any sense to have that running. So yes, I turn it all off. To the fundamental question, I have talked to a number of builders of pretty good houses who say, no, don't open your windows and doors. We designed this house to be conditioned. We design it to take care of indoor air quality, and that's what this house is meant to do. So don't try to ventilate on your own. Just keep it shut up and let it run and do its thing. But that's a personal thing, I guess, because for me, I don't want my windows and doors shut any more than they have to be, because I like being connected to the weather outside. I like hearing the birds chirp, all that stuff. So I'm willing to, we also, and we don't have anyone in the house with major allergies or anything like that. So, we can do it. That's a luxury that we have, but that's, from builders and designers of pretty good houses and high performance houses, I've heard, just let the house do its thing. It's designed to take care of it's designed to take care of your health and comfort.
How about you, Mike? What do you do with your pretty good house?
Yeah, so mine is a bit older than Brian's, and I used to have Brian's same opinion of, open it up in the nice seasons until, and this is the first year we owned the house, and we did open it up, particularly this time of year in the spring, mid-spring, and late spring, and it was, the whole inside of the house was just covered with pollen dust. So since then, we've flipped to the other side, which is keep it closed up as much as possible and just let the systems do what they're going to do. And most times when the weather's nice, we don't need to run the heating or cooling, but there will be some background ventilation that's going on that will bring in the fresh air. And one thing I've noticed since we stopped opening doors and windows, there's no dust anywhere in the house, not just from generated indoors. We don't have any pets, but also from the pollen or the air that's coming in. So I like having the filtered air in the house because my wife and I do have seasonal allergies. So it is a nice respite from being outside on a really pollen-filled day.
Anyone who's heard me talk about my circuitous path to my career has heard me say that I resisted wanting to work in an office, be inside 40, 50, 60 hours a week because I wanted to be outside. However, I think about the times we open the windows in our house, and honestly, there are very, very few times then it's appropriate. Yesterday, for example, our neighbors were having landscapers do their spring cleanup, and there must have been 4 of them out there with backpack blowers making a colossal cloud of dust everywhere. If it's not the backpack blowers, it's the, passing trucks in the morning. People are on the road at 4 or 5 a.m. and you hear them with the Jake brakes coming down the hill. It's folks stopping at the stop sign and then doing burnouts to leave the intersection, all of this stuff. And I think about it and I might as well have windows that open aside from emergency escape, right? Like they're used so infrequently. And, yeah.
Well, I think it's, there's good reasons to heed the advice of the designers and builders who say, let your house, especially if your house is, built, designed and built well with proper mechanicals and all that jazz. But some people are just going to want to have the experience of the windows open and all that. And you can test your indoor air quality and you can how you're feeling and whether you have allergies. And so I think it all can be a personal decision. I wanted to make a comment about the first part of his question where he talks about, this old farmhouse being leaky, because it's just something that's noted a lot by people who write to Fine Homebuilding and write into the podcast as if, their house is leaky and so it's fine. And so I wanted to comment on that a little bit. So for one thing, you can determine the natural air leakage in a house, right? There's a thing called ACH natural or ACHN, and there's a formula for it. It requires a blower door test, and you take those results and you combine them with some data about winds in your location and how well the house is shielded and how many stories the house has. And so basically surface area, I believe, and you come up with this ACH natural number. And from that ACH natural number, you can actually find out how much you can determine a few things. You can determine how much you're actually how much money, really, if you want to take it down to dollars, you're actually losing in terms of heating and cooling costs through your house being leaky. And then you can determine whether or not or how much ventilation you need in your house. The interesting thing about ACH natural and all these calculations that you can do is almost every conversation I've had with an expert about this, there's been this big caveat that it's just not a reliable metric because it always depends. And so there's no house that is, maybe there are houses that are leaky enough to just rely on that leakiness, but it's very unreliable to think because my house is leaky, I don't need any ventilation or filtration or any of that stuff.
That's going to get the letters flowing, I got to tell you.
Well, it doesn't mean, let's put it this way. It doesn't mean you might be wasting a lot of money. Number one, that's fine if you want to do that, but it's definitely not ensuring good indoor air quality. That's the bigger issue, right? Is that it's no assurance that you have good indoor air quality because your house is leaky.
Right. Because it could be coming from the rotting possum crawl space, right? Or whatever. Yeah.
Yes.
Andres, thoughts on this? If you had a pretty good house, would you open your windows?
Yes. I will definitely open the windows. I like to be connected to nature as well and hear the birds. If I do have a landscape, that is, if I have a traffic, just hearing traffic, then I would keep it closed. Really depends on that.
Well, I hope you all will write in with your thoughts on this question because it's something I've thought about. This comes from Dan. Hey, Patrick and team, love the show. Thanks for doing what you guys do every week to keep builders like myself better informed. I've listened to you long enough that I normally feel at least semi-confident when it comes to coming up with an appropriate building assembly for our climate zone. In this case, I'm hoping you can provide some guidance. We work in the Adirondack Mountains of northern New York, climate zone 6, and have a client that wants us to convert the attic of their 1910 home to a habitable play space for their kids. Currently, the floor of the attic has some fiberglass insulation under the floorboards, and there's also a little fiberglass bat insulation rolled out across the floor. It's mostly been flattened over the years by all the stuff that's been stored up there. The problem I see is trying to bring the attic into the home's thermal envelope. The rafters are plus or minus 6 inches deep, so there's not really enough room to pack enough R value to get to the R49 code required insulation level. There's not enough headroom to really pad the ceiling down. I'd like to add insulation on top of the roof deck, but they had the roof redone last year, so they don't want to go that route. The solution we've come up with, and I'd love for you to weigh in on, is we're hoping to maintain a vent channel for the roof deck by putting up 2x2s along the sides of the rafters and attaching Luan plywood across them. The remainder of the cavity would be filled with timber bat insulation. There might be room for a thin layer, 1 inch max, of continuous insulation on the underside of the rafters. Below that, we're thinking of then stapling up a smart vapor retarder like Certainteed Membrane or Siga Madrex, and then drywalling the ceiling. This probably means only getting an R15 or 20 in the vaulted part of the ceiling. At the attic floor level, we'd be pulling up floorboards and all the old insulation. We need to do this regardless to move electrical and plumbing, and then air sealing and re-insulating the floor cavity, likely with blown-in timber fill. Hopefully between the floor and ceiling, we can achieve the combined R49, and we call this new attic space a 3-season space. The clients are aware that this assembly will probably be cold up in there in the winter and hot in the summer, and they still want to go for it. Okay, the main questions are, is there something better we could do here? I feel constrained by the space limitations for building out the insulation depth, but maybe I'm overlooking something simple. Is doing a split insulation setup like this and making a 3-season space a horrible idea from a moisture perspective? Maybe the smart vapor retarder should be at the second floor ceiling level instead of at the attic level. Or should there be one at both? Anyways, I've been scratching my head for a minute on this one. It's definitely not an ideal or typical situation, but any insight you can provide would be greatly appreciated. This job is scheduled for 2025 at the soonest, so I'm hoping you'll take your time to think about it and provide a good answer. Thanks in advance. Keep up the great work, Dan. Dan, thanks for writing. So Dan, if you put insulation at the floor and at the rafter level, one of them is not doing anything, depending on how well, yeah, right? Go ahead, Mike. Am I wrong in that simplification?
No, well, you're not getting the 49 is what it is. You're not going to be able to add them up. You are right, though, that it's not doing anything from a total energy loss perspective necessarily. However, it does, by putting it at the ceiling level, Dan does not mention whether or not they're planning on any conditioning in that attic. And It sounds almost like they're not going to. So with that in mind, having the insulation at the ceiling level or the floor of the attic is almost necessary to keep your conditioned air in the main part of the living part of the home comfortable, as well as what he's anticipating to do in air sealing, I'm sure, in that whole plane. So that's ideal. But it does, having that insulation level at the ceiling of the attic does turn the attic into a buffer zone. So it will be buffered from the highest of highs in the summer and the lowest of lows of the winter. So in essence, it is doing a little bit to aid in the overall insulation value of the top of the house, but it's not R49. Maybe you're going to get an extra couple R value out of that buffer zone because there will be convective looping in there. But as far as the assembly that he's considering, it's a good start with that continuous vent with the loose fill. But what I would say is instead of, he mentioned possibly putting the 1 inch of rigid insulation on the other side of the rafters. one thing you could do instead of doing that, if the headroom allows, is do a bonfig roof. Put just some 1-inch thick or even half-inch thick pieces of foam over the rafters, and then put the drywall up against that, because it is such a thin cavity. Just reducing the conductive heat loss from the drywall through the rafters out to the roof, that would gain you a little bit of extra performance overall of the roof assembly. The only other thing I could think of in making that attic a little more comfortable, getting a higher R value, would be high density spray foam. But as we've talked about many times before on the podcast, there are environmental issues with that, and there's also the issue of, if there is ever any roof leaks, you won't know about them. So if you do go that route with the high density spray foam, have budget in for the homeowner for an IR camera, and instruct them how to do a water leak investigation on a roof every 2 to 3 years, which is the building science recommendation there.
Oh my gosh. So get an attic space and get an IR camera. It seems like a great deal to me. I think that, all of our listeners are yelling at their devices saying, why not put spray foam up there? And I think that's a good question. It's going to be fast and easy. And as Mike points out, there are some environmental concerns with that. But geez, builders who want to get stuff done, I'm guessing that's what their approach would be. I can't say that I would insulate the floor and the roof. I was like, go bigger on insulating the roof and make this part of the conditioned space so you can actually use it all year round and have it be more comfortable. I think it would be a wise choice.
There might be some things that we don't know about that he's discussed with the homeowners, why that wouldn't be a viable option for them. In other words, they don't want either an expense thing or a headroom thing where you could get in thicker insulation up by building down the rafters, things like that. He did mention one thing we didn't address in our just short answer there, which is the vapor retarder question. I think probably if you do a good air sealing job in the floor of the attic before insulating that you're not going to have much of a problem with the moisture getting from the inside of the house, figuring that the age of the house, there's probably an awful lot of coats of paint on the ceiling currently on the inside, and that all those layers of paint are going to effectively act as a vapor retarder, but still put a vapor retarder in at the attic level at the underside of the rafters can't hurt.
Especially with such a thin cavity, right? Because we're talking about condensation on the roof sheathing, right? Although a thin cavity would actually help with that, as I recall, right? Because it's going to keep it warmer than it would be otherwise.
He's going to have the vent channel up there with the Luan, which I've done, and it seems to work pretty well. So that would be the condensing surface, would be the Luan. What I would recommend, however, is rather than using Luan plywood, which was an interior grade lumber, I would use like a 1/4 inch exterior grade type, not pressure treated, of course, but an exterior grade with the exterior glues. That way, if it ever does have moisture condensing on it, it can absorb a little bit of moisture and then dry to the vent channel without delaminating, which probably could happen with your regular interior glue, what we think of as Luan or just really thin 5mm plywood.
I hope Dan will keep us posted on his client's project, because I think it sounds like a cool space for the family to get away from the rest of the house and have a little retreat. This comes from Lewis. Hello, Fine Homebuilding crew. I enjoy your podcast tremendously. I've been in construction my entire life, but got out of housing construction in the early 80s. Building houses has made great changes since the early 80s, and I'm currently building an addition on my unattached garage. I'm adding a partial second floor. I had my truss manufacturer design and build girders to support the second level. These girders are spanning 24 feet above the garage and another 10 feet over my addition. Each assembly consists of 3 girder trusses nailed together per the engineered nailing patterns. I incorporated the girders to be part of the outside wall. I placed a 2x6 wall on top of the girders to make up the entire height, the rest of the height of the wall. The 3-ply girder truss measures 4.5 inches thick. I decided to further them out with 2x4s on edge, making the total width 6 inches. I plan to fur out the 2x6 wall a half inch, also for a total of 6 inches. My question is regards insulating the walls. For the girders, I'm thinking of cutting and cobbling half-inch foam sheeting against the up against the OSB, and then covering it with 5.5-inch fiberglass. The only half-inch foam insulation I can find has aluminum foil face on both sides. On the upper 2x6 wall, I was thinking of insulating with 5.5-inch fiberglass and covering the wall with half-inch foam. I'm afraid this may be a mistake and not allow for moisture vapor to escape. Another option is to cut and cobble half-inch foam against the OSB sheathing and fur out the studs by a half an inch. Is it bad to have foil-covered foam on the warm side of the wall? As far as that is it bad to have foil-face foam tight to OSB? Or would it be best if I forgot about the half-inch and just insulated with 5.5-inch fiberglass bats and call it good? I've considered building a jig to rip down foam to 1/2 inch thick with a handsaw. This would eliminate the foil facing and I could choose the type of foam. If I did this, what type of foam should I choose? Please find the attached pictures of my project and a detailed drawing of my insulating plan. Thanks very much, Lewis S. So I'm first going to explain what Lewis has going on here to the best of my ability. He has what looks like a post frame building, or maybe it's a stud frame steel-sided building. And in the center of the space is a monitor or a second story section that doesn't go the full width of the bottom floor. Between this monitor section and the exterior walls of the lower section are monoslope roofs. So if you all have seen a monitor barn that has a raised section down the center, in essence, that's what he's doing. And he's holding up the walls to this second floor space with these giant girder trusses that go from the gable ends of the lower floor. If that makes sense, good for you. Was that clear, Brian? Did I do a decent job explaining this? How would you?
I was looking at the photos, so I was I had an advantage.
So in essence, they hold up these second floor walls, which would be in the center of the roof span. These girders pick up the bottom plates of these 2x6 walls that then hold up what look like roof trusses above the second floor space. So his question is how to insulate the 2x6 stud wall above the girder trusses and how to insulate the girder trusses themselves. Mike, your thoughts?
My thoughts is the cut and cobble. That's going to be a lot of work in those open web girder trusses to cut all of those shapes and get them in there to have them be effective. And that's my first thought. My other thought is he's concerned about moisture and using the aluminum-faced insulation and that being a true vapor barrier on the outside. So that could be a block to that moisture moving through, and you get condensation on there potentially. And I just wonder if there's going to be enough moisture that's even going to be in that space that's going to be a problem. It's just going to be used for an activity room. And even though he has a bathroom, there may not be a whole ton of moisture being generated in there. So if he did want to do the foil faced in that space, cut and cobble, I don't know as it would be a terrible problem. Could be wrong, but could do an experiment, let it go for 20 years and take it apart and see what's happening. Or leave one of those little view windows to monitor it, or put in a sensor in there if you wanted. But if you want to go to the effort to put in that foil face in there, I wouldn't worry too much about it. And I'd almost wonder if you need to do that. I would say, it's not going to be used all the time. It's not going to be heated up to a high temperature on a regular basis. Maybe it's just fine putting in whatever cavity insulation you can do and calling it done.
Martin Holliday offered my reality check when I was building the space that I'm recording the podcast from, our outbuilding, our workshop studio space. And he's like, Patrick, how much are you really going to be using this space? I was agonizing over the heating plant decision. And he's like, If you're lucky, you're going to use this space maybe 30, 40 hours a week. Of course, we didn't know COVID was going to happen and I would end up working from here every day. But I think it was a sobering conversation to have, is that you're overthinking this. You're not going to use this space. It's not going to be fully conditioned. Enjoy the space, get on with your life, build it as quickly as possible so you can enjoy it. Do you think that's bad advice, Brian?
No, I think you both gave good advice. And to Mike's first point about the cut and cobble in this situation, man, I would like to just, if I were doing this, I'd want to just call a dense pack installer, and because these spaces, even installing fiberglass bats or mineral wool in these odd shaped cavities is going to be slow and tedious. I'd want someone to come in and put up netting and just blow insulation in. And I tend to agree. I don't know. We don't know what, how this addition interacts with the garage below, and how, well he's able to air seal between the two spaces. I think just get it as well insulated as possible and call it a day, and get in there and have fun.
The other thing I think that's very important is we have garage doors and other huge openings in this place. This is not the problem with conditioning this building. It's going to be those giant openings. And
And if anything, it's the connection between the garage below and this space above that would be where I'd be putting my time and money.
Air sealing, you mean? Air sealing, divorcing that usable insulated space from the rest of the garage, unless that garage is going to be, And I like your idea, Brian, of doing the blown in. That makes a lot of sense. It's just going to, as I look at the photograph, not only are those open web girder trusses odd shape with the triangles, but also the wall above it, there's a lot of small spaces that are going to be not matched to your standard framing. Plus there's some blocking in there. Just dense pack it and it'll fill all of those in nice and full and tight.
And it'll be comfortable and quiet, because that insulation is incredible with sound attenuation. It's amazing the transformation between, an insulated and insulated space, uninsulated and insulated. Well, I want to thank you all for listening to the show, and especially for your comments, questions, and suggestions. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Mike, Brian, and Andres for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to FHBpodcast at finehomebuilding.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find the podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Thanks very much for supporting the brand.